those who came from darkness. The city of Meridian had seen many strange things in its 1,000-year history, but nothing quite like the night the sky began to bleed darkness. It started as whispers on the evening news. Meteorologists stumbled over their words, trying to explain the anomaly appearing on their screens. Dark streaks descending through the atmosphere, but registering no heat signature, no electromagnetic radiation, just absence, holes in the fabric of light itself, falling like inverse stars toward the northwestern district of the city. Marcus Chen stood on the rooftop terrace of his architectural firm, watching the phenomenon with the trained eye of someone who had spent 30 years learning to see structure in chaos. Beside him, his wife Elena shifted uncomfortably, her psychologist's intuition sensing something the instruments couldn't measure. "We should go home," she said quietly. "Lila will be frightened." Their daughter, 12 years old, curious as a cat, brave as a lion. Marcus smiled, despite his own unease. "Lila? She's probably got her telescope out, trying to get a closer look." He was right, of course. By the time they arrived at their century-old house on Maple Grove, Lila had already dragged her telescope onto the back porch, its lens pointed at the darkening sky. The garden behind their home stretched into a small wooded area, one of the last remnants of old-growth forest within the city limits. Marcus had bought the property specifically for that privacy, that connection to something older than concrete and steel. "Dad, Mom, you have to see this!" Lila's voice carried that electric excitement only children can truly master. "They're not meteors, they're changing direction." Marcus peered through the telescope. His daughter was right. The dark streaks weren't following ballistic trajectories. They curved, adjusted, moved with something resembling purpose. His architect's mind immediately began calculating vectors, trying to predict where they might. The impact, when it came, was silent. No explosion, no thunder. Just a sudden deepening of shadows in their backyard, among the oak trees at the forest's edge. The porch lights flickered once, twice, then died. The house lights followed. Within seconds, the entire neighborhood had gone dark. But it wasn't a normal power outage. Marcus realized this immediately. There were no distant lights from other districts, no glow from downtown. The darkness was complete, absolute, as if the city itself had been swallowed. "Stay here," he told Elena and Lila, reaching for the flashlight they kept by the back door. "Marcus, I mean it, stay here." He didn't turn on the flashlight immediately. Some instinct held his thumb away from the switch. Instead, he moved slowly into the garden, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The moon was up there somewhere, he knew, but its light seemed muted, absorbed by something in the air itself. The temperature had dropped, not drastically, but noticeably. His breath misted in front of him, in July. Then he heard it, a sound like wind through reeds, but with an underlying structure, almost like language, if language could be made of whispers and the rustle of leaves. It came from the tree line. Marcus's hand tightened on the flashlight. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to turn around, to go back to his family, to call the authorities, but there was something else, some deeper instinct that kept him moving forward. He'd spent his career creating spaces for people to live in, to feel safe in. Perhaps that's why he recognized, in that alien sound, something that felt like fear. He was 10 feet from the trees when he saw them. Shapes, moving in the darkness between the oaks. Taller than humans, but not grotesquely so. Their forms seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them difficult to focus on. There were 3 of them, he thought, maybe 4. They moved with a fluid grace that reminded him of water flowing uphill, of smoke falling instead of rising. Marcus raised the flashlight. "Don't!" The word came from behind him. Elena stood there, having ignored his command as he'd known she would. But there was something in her voice, not fear exactly, but the kind of careful calm she used with her most traumatized patients. "Why not?" he whispered back. "Look at them. Really look at them." He did. And as his eyes adjusted further, as he learned to see in this new kind of darkness, he began to understand. The shapes weren't aggressive. They were huddled together, pressed against each other the way frightened children might. One of them, the smallest, was trembling visibly. Elena took the flashlight from his hand gently and set it on the ground, still switched off. Then she did something that would change everything. She sat down on the grass, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Marcus," she said softly, "I think they're refugees."
The negotiation, if it could be called that, took 3 hours. Elena led it with the same patient skill she'd brought to her therapy sessions, though this required a different kind of translation. Words weren't the issue. The beings seemed to understand spoken language somehow, or at least intent. The problem was light. Every time Marcus even thought about turning on a lamp, the beings recoiled. The smallest one, Lila had started calling it shadow in whispered conversation, made a sound like glass breaking underwater. It took Elena's careful observation to realize the light wasn't just uncomfortable for them. It was harmful, dangerous, perhaps even lethal. By 2 a.m., they'd established a basic framework of trust. The beings had followed them to the house, but stopped at the threshold, unwilling to enter. It was Lila who solved this problem. She'd been watching from the kitchen window, and now she appeared with an armful of blackout curtains from the storage room. "The basement," she said simply. "No windows. We can make it completely dark." Marcus looked at his daughter, so young, so impossibly brave, and felt his heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. "Lila, we don't know what they are, what they want." "They're scared, Dad." She said it with such simple certainty. "I know what scared looks like." So they prepared the basement, covered every crack, every seam where light might intrude. Elena worked with methodical precision, her therapist's mind already adapting to this unprecedented situation. Marcus found himself falling into his architect's habits, analyzing the space, thinking about how to make it livable, safe. The beings entered slowly, cautiously. In the absolute darkness of the sealed basement, Marcus could barely see them even standing just feet away, but he could hear them. That wind through reeds sound, but softer now, almost like sighs of relief. Elena had brought down cushions, blankets, basic supplies. She had also brought her voice recorder, a habit from her practice. Marcus heard it click on. "Can you understand me?" she asked the darkness. Silence. Then, "Yes." The voice was like nothing Marcus had ever heard. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, harmonizing with itself, multiple tones creating a single word. But it was unmistakably an answer. "Do you have names?" A longer pause. Then the voice came again, this time fractured into 3 distinct resonances. "I am..." The closest translation would be Vaisha. "The one you call Shadow is Mira. Our companion is Krell." Marcus felt his worldview cracking and reforming. He was talking to aliens, actual extraterrestrial beings in his basement, in Meridian, on a Tuesday night. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. "Where are you from?" Elena continued, her voice steady. "A world." Vaisha's voice carried something that sounded like grief. "A world that no longer exists. Our star underwent what you would call a supernova. We had warning, but not much. We are all that escaped." "How many of you?" On this planet? Perhaps 30 ships. Perhaps fewer. We scattered, tried to find shelter, but every place we've gone, the inhabitants, the voice trailed off. The light hurts you, Elena said. It wasn't a question. It burns. Your sun, most stars, they're too bright, too hot in the spectrum we perceive. We evolved on a world lit by a dying red dwarf. We saw an infrared, in deep wavelengths. Your visible light is like acid to our cellular structure. Marcus processed this. You've tried other places? Other countries? 7 continents. 14 major population centers. Every time, once they discover us, once they understand what we are, Vaishya made that breaking glass sound, fear turns to aggression. Always. We've lost 23 of our people to mob violence, 17 to military intervention. We learned to hide, to stay in darkness, to run. The basement fell silent. Upstairs, Marcus could hear the old house settling, the familiar creaks and groans he'd learned over 15 years of living here. Normal sounds from a normal world that had suddenly become very abnormal. You can stay, Elena said. Marcus's head whipped toward her, though he couldn't see her in the darkness. Elena, you can stay, she repeated, firmer this time, at least for now, until we figure out what to do next. Do you understand what you're suggesting? If anyone finds out, if the government... Marcus, her hand found his in the dark. Do you remember why you became an architect? The question caught him off guard. I wanted to create spaces where people could feel safe, where they could build their lives. And why did I become a therapist? He understood. To help those who had nowhere else to turn. So, her grip tightened. What exactly has changed? Everything, Marcus wanted to say. And nothing. Because at the core of it, Elena was Knight. They'd spent their lives trying to help, to build, to heal. The fact that these refugees weren't human didn't change the fundamental equation. But it made everything infinitely more complicated. Leela's voice came from the stairs, small and hopeful. So they're staying? Marcus sighed, feeling the weight of the decision settle onto his shoulders. He was an architect. He'd deal with the practical problems, the impossible logistics, the danger they were now all in. They're staying, he confirmed, at least for tonight. In the darkness, Vaishya made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Thank you. You cannot understand what this means. To find kindness in a universe that has shown us none. But Marcus thought maybe he could understand. Because in that moment, sitting in the pitch-black basement of his home, with his wife and daughter and 3 beings from a dead world, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Even in the darkness, hope could grow.
The next 3 weeks were an education in impossibility. Marcus learned that quantum physics had severely underestimated the adaptability of life. The beings, he'd stopped thinking of them as aliens and started thinking of them as refugees, existed in a state that defied conventional biology. They didn't seem to eat, at least not in any way he recognized. Instead, they absorbed energy from temperature differentials, from the thermal gradients in the basement. They were, in essence, living thermodynamic systems. Elena learned that trauma was universal. In her sessions with Vaishya, because yes, she'd somehow turned their basement into a therapy space, she discovered that grief and loss transcended species boundaries. Vaishya spoke of their world not with the detachment of a survivor, but with the raw pain of someone who'd watched everything they loved burn. We had 7 continents, Vaishya told her one night, their voice like distant thunder. 12 billion souls, artists, scientists, parents, children. We had poetry, Marcus would be fascinated to know. We built cities that existed in eternal twilight, structures that captured and channeled the faintest light into spaces of beauty. "You were a builder," Elena said, understanding. "I was, the closest word would be a shadow weaver. I shaped darkness the way your glassblowers shaped light. And now all of it is gone, scattered atoms in an expanding debris field." Elena recorded it all, not for science, but because she understood that bearing witness was sometimes the only therapy that mattered. Leela learned that friendship didn't require words. Mira, the youngest of the refugees, couldn't have been more different from a human child. They communicated through resonances, through patterns of heat and cold, through movements that seemed to bend the air itself. But Mira played. They were curious. They got scared during thunderstorms. Leela spent hours in the basement, teaching Mira about Earth. She'd brought down books, carefully using a red-filtered light that didn't harm the refugees. Her tablet with the brightness turned to minimum. Her collection of smooth stones from various vacations. Mira couldn't touch most things. Their body temperature ran so cold that contact with room temperature objects caused them something like pain. But they learned to manipulate air currents, to move objects without touching them. One evening, Marcus came down to find his daughter and the alien child playing a game that seemed to involve moving colored stones in patterns. He couldn't follow the rules, but the sound of Leela's laughter mixing with Mira's wind chime responses made his throat tight. "Dad!" Leela looked up, her face illuminated by the faint red glow of her filtered lamp. "Mira can make shapes in the air! Watch!" The darkness before them shimmered. For just a moment, Marcus could see it, a structure of pure cold, water vapor condensing and freezing in patterns that resembled a building, spires and arches, impossible geometries that seemed to exist in more dimensions than three. "That's their home, or what it was," Leela whispered. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. He was an architect. He understood what it meant to love a structure, to pour your soul into creating space. To see that structure reduced to memory, it was a death of its own kind. "It was beautiful," he said to the darkness, to Mira, to whatever gods might listen. "Your home was beautiful." The frozen structure dissolved, but not before Mira made that wind chime sound again. Leela reached out, stopping just before touching the alien child, her hand hovering in the cold air between them. "We'll help you build a new one," she promised, somehow. But Marcus knew it wouldn't be that simple, because while his family was learning to live with their impossible guests, the world outside was asking questions. The power outage had been attributed to solar flare activity. The missing meteors explained away as sensor glitches. But people had seen things. Videos circulated on social media. Grainy footage of dark shapes moving through streets, of shadow creatures that vanished when lights were turned on them. Conspiracy theories bloomed like toxic flowers. The government issued statements about mass hysteria, about the dangers of spreading misinformation. But Marcus saw the military helicopters patrolling the city's outskirts. He heard the news reports about a new task force being assembled to investigate anomalous phenomena. And he knew, with the certainty of someone watching a storm approach, that their time was running out. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Thomas Reeves lived next door. He'd been their neighbor for 8 years, a retired postal worker with a passion for amateur astronomy and an unfortunate tendency toward paranoia. Marcus had always gotten along with him. He had even helped redesign his garden shed 3 years ago. Thomas had noticed things. The Chen family spending unusual amounts of time in their basement. The way they'd blacked out the basement windows. The strange temperature readings his weather sensors were picking up from their property. Cold spots, sudden drops that made no meteorological sense. He'd been watching, and he'd seen Marcus carrying supplies down at odd hours. Seen Elena sneaking out to buy food that never seemed to be eaten. Seen Leela talking to empty air in the backyard late at night.
On the 23rd day, Thomas made a phone call. Marcus was at work when he got Elena's text. "We have a problem. Come home now." He made it back in 17 minutes, breaking every speed limit. The black SUV in his driveway made his blood run cold. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that appeared when situations moved beyond local police jurisdiction. Inside, he found Elena sitting at the kitchen table across from two people in dark suits, a man and a woman, both with the kind of carefully neutral expressions that came from years of practice. "Mr. Chen," the woman said, standing, "I'm Agent Sarah Morrison. This is Agent David Park. We're with the Department of Homeland Security, Special Investigations Division." Marcus's mouth went dry. "What's this about?" "Your neighbor filed a report, suspected unauthorized occupants on your property." Agent Morrison's voice was professional, but Marcus caught something in her eyes. Curiosity? Fear? "We need to inspect your basement." "Do you have a warrant?" "We don't need one," Agent Park said flatly. "National security exception. If you refuse, we'll simply obtain one and return with sufficient force to ensure compliance. It would be easier for everyone if you cooperated." Elena's hand found Marcus's. She squeezed once, hard. A signal. "Trust me." "We'll cooperate," she said calmly, "but first, you need to understand what you're walking into." Agent Morrison tilted her head. "I'm listening." "You're looking for aliens," Elena continued, her therapist's voice coming through, calm, rational, but with steel underneath. "You're going to find them, 3 refugees from a dead world who mean no harm, who are simply trying to survive. But if you go down there with flashlights, with normal lights of any kind, you'll hurt them, possibly kill them." Agent Park scoffed. "Ma'am, if you're I'm harboring survivors of a genocide, beings who have been attacked, hunted, murdered by frightened populations across 7 continents. And if you're here to add to that body count, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me that's who you are." The room fell silent. Marcus watched the agents, saw them exchange glances. Morrison seemed to be the decision-maker. She studied Elena with an intensity that Marcus found uncomfortable. "Your therapist," Morrison said finally, "Dr. Elena Chen, specialized in trauma and PTSD. You work with refugees. Human refugees until recently, but trauma is trauma. And you believe these beings are harmless?" "I believe they're desperate," Elena corrected. "There's a difference. Desperate people, desperate beings, can become dangerous if cornered. But if treated with basic dignity, yes, I believe they're harmless. More than that, I believe turning them away would be one of the great moral failures of our species." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Director? Morrison, we've located 3 potential extraterrestrial biological entities at the reported location. Host family is cooperative. Request guidance on—" "Yes, sir. I understand." "No, sir. Different from the others. Much different." She hung up and looked at Marcus and Elena. "My director wants a full assessment before determining next steps. That means we go into your basement. Dr. Chen, you'll accompany us and serve as liaison. Mr. Chen, you stay here." "Like how—" Marcus started. Elena squeezed his hand again. "Marcus, trust me. I've got this." She didn't have this, but what choice did they have? Marcus watched helplessly as Elena led the 2 agents to the basement door. She paused there, one hand on the knob. "One more thing," she said. "These beings communicate. They understand us. If you treat them like specimens, like threats, they'll know, and you'll learn nothing. But if you treat them like people," she smiled slightly, "you might just learn something that changes everything." Then she opened the door and descended into darkness, taking the agents and Marcus's heart with her.
Agent Sarah Morrison had seen a lot in her 15 years with the department. Terrorist cells, bioweapon labs, technology that officially didn't exist. But nothing had prepared her for this. sitting in pitch darkness in a suburban basement, interviewing beings from another world. Dr. Chen had been right about the lights. Agent Park had reflexively reached for his flashlight when they entered the basement, and the sound that emerged from the darkness, like metal tearing, like screaming ice, had made them both freeze. The cold had been instantaneous, dropping so fast that Morrison's breath turned to fog. "I warned you," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Infrared goggles might work. Normal spectrum light? Don't." Now, Morrison sat on what felt like a cushion, her service weapon holstered but accessible, her heart rate elevated but controlled. She'd done hostage negotiations in worse conditions. At least here, she could hear. "My name is Sarah Morrison," she said to the darkness. "I'm a federal agent. I'm here to determine if you represent a threat to national security." The response came from everywhere and nowhere. "We represent a threat to nothing but your capacity for mercy." The voice, Visha's, according to Dr. Chen, carried layers of meaning Morrison couldn't quite parse. Sorrow and dignity and something that might have been humor. "You're not from Earth," Morrison continued, falling into her interrogation training. "Establish facts, build a framework. Where exactly are you from?" "A world whose name would mean nothing to you. A planet orbiting a star your astronomers cataloged as Gliese 581, 36.6 light-years from here, or what it used to be there." Morrison knew that star. She'd read the briefings. 3 weeks ago, the Astronomical Union had reported unusual readings from that sector. A stellar event, they'd called it. A red dwarf going supernova, something that shouldn't have been possible. "How many of you escaped?" 347 ships left our world. We had 8 hours warning. We saved approximately 42,000 souls out of 12 billion. Visha's voice cracked like ice calving from a glacier. "Would you like to know how we chose who lived? Because I remember every face of every person we left behind." The raw pain in those words made Morrison's next question die in her throat. She thought of her own daughter, safe at home. What would she sacrifice to save her if the world was ending? Agent Park spoke up from beside her. "You've been to other countries, other cities. What happened?" A different voice answered. Krell, deeper, carrying an edge like stone grinding on stone. "We were discovered. We tried to communicate, to explain. But fear is a universal language, Agent. Fear breeds violence. In Jakarta, they burned the warehouse where we'd sheltered. 19 of us died, our molecular structures disrupted by the heat. In Cairo, the military used flamethrowers. In Sao Paulo, it was a mob with torches. Everywhere we went, we tried to hide, to minimize our impact. We don't consume your resources. We don't compete for your space. We simply need darkness and cold. That's all. But it's never enough, is it? Because we're different. Because we remind you that the universe is vaster and stranger than your comfortable certainties." Morrison felt something shift in her chest. She joined Homeland Security to protect people. But which people? And from what? "Help me understand," she said, making a decision that might cost her career. "If I report back that you're hostile, that you're a threat, my superiors will authorize military intervention. This house will be surrounded within an hour. They'll use thermal weapons, probably incendiaries. Dr. Chen's family will be arrested for harboring foreign biological entities. You'll be killed,
or captured for study. That's the reality we're facing. We know, Visha said simply. We've faced it before. We're tired of running. But if I report that you're refugees, that you're sapient beings seeking asylum, I can buy time, maybe. There are protocols, legal frameworks for unprecedented situations, but I need to know, what do you want? Long term, what's your goal here? Silence in the darkness. Morrison waited, counting heartbeats. Finally, the third voice spoke, younger, uncertain, Mira. We want what every child wants, a home, a place where we belong. We want to learn about your world. We want to teach you about ours. We want to grow old, or whatever our equivalent is, without fear. Morrison thought about her own daughter again. Then she thought about her oath, to protect and defend. But whom? Against what? Dr. Chen, can you find some infrared equipment? I need to see them, not to threaten, but to understand. 10 minutes later, Morrison looked through the infrared monocular Dr. Chen had retrieved from the Chen family's camping supplies. The image was fuzzy, dreamlike, but she could make out shapes. 3 forms, roughly humanoid, but elongated, their bodies seeming to pulse with cold rather than heat. They were holding each other, she realized, the way families do when they're afraid. She made her decision. Agent Park, I need you to go to the car and report that we found no evidence of unauthorized occupants. Neighbor's report appears unfounded, possibly related to his mental health issues. Agent Morrison, that's an order. Her voice carried the weight of rank. Then I need you to establish a perimeter. No one comes near this property without going through me first. She heard Park stand, hesitate, and then move toward the stairs. The basement door opened, admitting a shaft of light that made the beings recoil. Then darkness again. Morrison removed the infrared monocular and addressed the shadows. I'm buying you time, maybe a week, maybe more, but this situation cannot continue. You need a permanent solution. We've found one, Visha said simply. There are cave systems deep underground, far from population centers. We've been mapping them through your internet. Places where we could live without impacting your surface dwellers. But getting there safely, establishing ourselves without being discovered. The voice trailed off. An idea formed in Morrison's mind. Crazy, career-ending, possibly treasonous, but also right. What if I could arrange transport, official transport, with federal protection? You would do this? Disbelief colored Visha's voice. You would risk your position, your safety for us? Morrison thought about all the interrogations she'd conducted, all the threats she'd neutralized, all the times she'd been certain of the enemy. This was different. This was choosing humanity over humans. Or maybe it was choosing humanity in its truest sense. I joined this agency to protect people, all people, and I think that definition just got a lot bigger. Upstairs, she found Marcus Chen pacing the living room while his daughter sat on the couch trying to look brave and failing. Dr. Chen emerged from the basement behind Morrison, her expression carefully neutral. Morrison pulled out her phone and made another call. This one would change everything. Director, Morrison again. Sir, we need to discuss asylum protocols for sapient non-human entities, and I need the legal team to find me every precedent we have for first contact situations. She paused. Yes, sir. I understand this is unprecedented. That's exactly why we need to get it right.
The director's call came at 3 a.m. Marcus jerked awake to the sound of Elena's phone buzzing on the nightstand. She answered it instantly, her therapist's habit of always being ready for crisis calls. "Dr. Chen." A pause. "Yes, this is she. Yes, I can be there. Give me 20 minutes." She hung up and looked at Marcus in the darkness. "That was Director James Hawthorne. He wants a meeting. Downtown, Federal Building. He specifically requested me, not you." "That's insane. It's 3 in the morning." "He's flying in from D.C. Apparently, Agent Morrison's report caused what he called significant disruption in the chain of command. Marcus," she touched his face, "this could go very wrong. Or very right. Always the optimist." She kissed him quickly and got dressed. Marcus lay awake after she left, listening to the house settle, wondering if his wife was walking into a trap. At 3:47 a.m., he gave up on sleep and went to check on Leela. Her room was empty. He found her in the basement, sitting with Mira in the darkness. They weren't talking. You couldn't really talk with Mira in the traditional sense, but there was communication happening. Temperature shifts, patterns of cold air, the kind of wordless exchange that transcended language. "Can't sleep?" Marcus asked softly from the stairs. "Mira's scared," Leela said. "They think the agents are going to take them away." Marcus descended carefully, feeling his way. "Agent Morrison seems different, like she actually cares." "One good person isn't enough, Dad." Leela's voice was small in the darkness. "You taught me that. You said systems matter more than individuals, that you can't build a safe structure on a weak foundation." When had his daughter become so wise? Marcus sat beside her, feeling the cold that radiated from Mira's presence. It was uncomfortable, but not unbearable, like sitting near an air conditioner. "You're right," he admitted. "One agent, one family, one moment of compassion. None of it matters if the system is designed to reject them. But Leela, systems are built by people. If enough people make the right choice, then the system changes," Leela finished. "I know. I just wish it could change faster." Vaish's voice emerged from deeper in the basement. "Your daughter is wise beyond her years, Marcus. On our world, we had a saying, 'The oldest souls wear the youngest faces.' I think that's true here as well." "How long did your people exist before the end?" 2 million of your years, give or take. We evolved slowly in the dim light of our dying star. We understood the universe before we understood ourselves. And in the end, all that wisdom, all that time couldn't save us from a stellar convulsion." "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. "Don't be. Be angry instead. Anger is more useful than sorrow. Your species stands at a crossroads, architect. You're about to learn that you're not alone in the cosmos. How you respond to that knowledge will define your future. Will you be a species that extends mercy or one that builds walls?" Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. Elena. "Meeting went better than expected. Coming home. Prepare for visitors tomorrow. Official ones." He showed Leela the message. She read it and looked toward where she knew Mira was huddled. "Is that good?" she asked the darkness. "We'll find out," Vaishya replied. "We've learned not to hope too quickly. Hope has proven expensive." Elena arrived home at 6 a.m., looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Marcus made coffee while she debriefed him. "Director Hawthorne is old-school military, but he's also a pragmatist. Agent Morrison's report convinced him that forcible removal would result in casualties on both sides and international diplomatic disaster. The other 7 governments that have encountered the refugees are watching. If the U.S. handles this badly, it sets a precedent. So what's the plan? They're establishing a provisional protocol for sapient non-human entities. It's unprecedented, but there's legal framework from the old alien contact think tanks that SETI ran back in the day. Theoretical stuff that's suddenly very practical." She sipped her coffee. "They want to interview Vaishya, Krell, and Mira, officially, with proper documentation, and they want me there as an advocate." "An advocate?" I repeated. They're treating them like people. Some of them are. Hawthorne is. Morrison definitely is. But there's pushback, Marcus. The Department of Defense wants them classified as potential hostile entities. The CDC wants them quarantined for biological study. There's a faction that wants to weaponize their cold generation abilities. My stomach turned. Elena? I know, but Hawthorne is holding them off, for now. He's argued that establishing peaceful first contact is worth more than any military application, that the knowledge the refugees could share, science, philosophy, their understanding of stellar mechanics that let them predict a supernova, that's invaluable.
He wants to use them, Marcus said bitterly. He wants to work with them. There's a difference. I think. I hope. Elena set down her coffee cup. The bottom line is this. If the interview goes well, if Vaishya can convince a panel of scientists and officials that they're truly refugees and not an invasion force or a biological threat, then Hawthorne will recommend asylum, protected status, permission to settle in designated areas. And if it doesn't go well? Elena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet. Then Agent Morrison has promised me a 12-hour warning before they move in, time enough to make choices. Marcus understood. Time enough to help them escape, to become fugitives themselves if necessary. When's the interview? Today, 2 p.m. They're sending a specialized transport vehicle, light-sealed, temperature-controlled. Vaishya, Krell, and Mira will be taken to a secure facility downtown. I'll accompany them. You and Leela, stay here. Stay safe. If things go wrong, you need to be clear of it. Absolutely not. Elena. We're a family, Elena. We made this choice together. We stay together. From the doorway, Leela's voice. What Dad said. Elena looked at them both, her eyes wet. Then she nodded. Okay, together. But if I say run, you run, both of you. Promise me. They promised. Marcus wasn't sure if he meant it. The transport vehicle arrived at 1:30 p.m. It looked like an armored bank truck, but with modifications that spoke of hasty engineering. Blackened windows, refrigeration units humming on the roof, sensors Marcus didn't recognize studded along its sides. Agent Morrison emerged first, followed by a man in his 50s with military bearing and eyes that had seen too much. Director Hawthorne, Marcus assumed. Dr. Chen, Mr. Chen, thank you for your cooperation. I understand this has been an extraordinary situation. That's putting it mildly, Marcus replied. Hawthorne almost smiled. Indeed. Shall we proceed? The panel is waiting, and I'd like to minimize time in transit, less chance of complications. The transfer took 15 tense minutes. The basement had to be sealed completely before the transport could connect, a specialized airlock-like tunnel that attached to the house's exterior basement access door. Marcus watched through the infrared monitor as Vaishya, Krell, and Mira moved through the tunnel into the vehicle's dark interior. Mira hesitated at the threshold. Through the monitor's fuzzy image, Marcus saw Leela reach toward the alien child, their hands not quite touching across the barrier of temperature. I'll see you soon, I promise. Mira made that wind chime sound, trust mixed with fear, and entered the transport. Elena went next, briefcase in hand, every inch the professional advocate. Then, despite Hawthorne's clear preference otherwise, Marcus and Leela climbed in behind her. The interior of the transport was like nothing Marcus had ever seen. The temperature hovered near freezing. The walls were lined with some kind of light-absorbing material that seemed to drink in any stray photons. Emergency lighting ran along the floor in deep red strips, barely visible but enough to navigate by. The refugees huddled in the far corner.
Even in the darkness, Marcus could sense their tension. 20 minutes to the facility, Morrison said from the driver's compartment. Everyone stay calm. The drive through Meridian felt surreal. Marcus knew that outside the city was going about its normal afternoon. People at coffee shops, children at playgrounds, tourists taking photos of the historic district. None of them aware that 3 beings from a dead world were passing through their streets, heading toward a moment that might determine the future of human-alien relations. The facility turned out to be an underground bunker complex beneath the federal building. More specialized tunnels, more careful transfers. Marcus found himself in an observation room with Leela, while Elena accompanied the refugees into what Hawthorne called the interview chamber. Through a one-way infrared screen, Marcus watched as the panel assembled. 12 people, scientists, military officials, a State Department representative, someone from the UN, and others whose roles he could only guess. They sat behind a curved table, illuminated by carefully filtered lights that wouldn't affect the refugees, but allowed the human participants to see. Vaishya stood, if that was the right word, in the center of the room. Krell and Mira flanked them, family formation, mutual support. Elena sat to the side, tablet ready, her expression composed but fierce. Director Hawthorne opened the proceedings. This session is being recorded for the historical record. Present are 3 entities claiming refugee status under a yet undefined protocol for sapient non-human life. The purpose of this interview is to establish identity, intent, and potential security implications. Counselor Chen will serve as advocate and liaison. He turned toward Vaishya. State your name and origin, please. I am Vaishya, of the world you knew as Glisa 581D. I was a shadow weaver, an artist who worked in darkness and cold. I am 347 of your years old. My companions are Krell, a stellar physicist, and Mira, who is a child by any species measure. One of the scientists leaned forward. You claim your star went supernova. Our observations confirm unusual activity in that system, but a red dwarf shouldn't be capable of supernova events. Can you explain? Krell's voice emerged, that grinding stone resonance. Your understanding of stellar mechanics is incomplete. What you observed wasn't a traditional supernova. It was a stellar collision. A brown dwarf, a failed star, had been approaching our system for 2 million years, undetected, because it emitted almost no light. When it finally collided with our sun, the resulting energy release was catastrophic. Murmurs around the table. Marcus saw one of the scientists frantically making notes.
2 million years of approach, Krell continued, and we only detected it with 8 hours to spare. We were a civilization that had mastered quantum entanglement, that had learned to manipulate thermal dynamics at the molecular level, but we couldn't outrun a stellar disaster. Of 12 billion souls, we saved barely 4,000. And the rest of your survivors? The UN representative asked. You said only 3 of you are here. Scattered across your solar system, Vaishya answered. Some settled on Mars's polar regions, in the deep ice. Others went to Europa, to the dark oceans beneath the frozen surface. We're not an invasion force. We're a diaspora. We went where we could survive without disturbing your species. Why Earth, then? The military official's voice was sharp with suspicion. If you can survive elsewhere, why risk contact with humans? Silence. Then Mira spoke,
that young voice carrying surprising strength. Because we're lonely. Because Europa is cold and silent and empty of life. Because Mars is dead stone. Because after watching your world burn, after running for 300 years across space, after being attacked and killed everywhere we've tried to find shelter, we wanted to be near something alive, something that might understand. The room went quiet. Marcus watched the panel members exchange glances. He couldn't read all their expressions through the infrared display, but he saw some shift in body language. Shoulders relaxing slightly, heads tilting in consideration rather than denial. Elena spoke up. "If I may address the panel, these beings have been in my care for 3 weeks. I'm a trauma psychologist with 20 years of experience working with refugees from war zones, genocide survivors, victims of systematic violence. What I've observed in Visha, Krell, and Mira matches every psychological profile I've seen in human refugees. They're traumatized, they're grieving, they're terrified, and they're trying desperately to survive with dignity intact." "With respect, Dr. Chen," the State Department representative interjected. "Your expertise is with humans. How can you be certain your assessments translate to non-human psychology?" "Because pain is universal," Elena said simply. "I've sat with Visha while they described watching their world die. I've seen Mira flinch at sudden noises, show hypervigilance, display every symptom of PTSD that I've encountered in human refugees. Maybe their biology is different, but their suffering, that's something any sentient being can recognize." One of the scientists, an older woman with white hair, spoke up. "I have a question for Visha. You say you were an artist. Can you show us? Can you create something here, now?" Visha seemed to hesitate. Then they moved to the center of the room, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Marcus watched through the infrared as air currents shifted, as moisture in the air began to crystallize. What emerged took his breath away. It was a structure, a building, a temple, something between architecture and sculpture, made entirely of ice crystals suspended in carefully controlled air currents. It rotated slowly, catching the faint infrared light and refracting it in patterns that seemed mathematically impossible. Spires and arches, negative spaces and solid forms, all flowing into each other with organic grace. Marcus recognized the aesthetic immediately. It was what he'd been chasing his entire career as an architect, the perfect marriage of form and function, of beauty and purpose. This being from a dead world had just created in 30 seconds what he'd spent 30 decades trying to achieve. "This," Visha said quietly, "is the Temple of Perpetual Twilight. It stood in our capital city for 800,000 years. It was where we gathered to contemplate the end of stars, the death of light, the beauty of entropy. When our sun died, this was the last structure to be destroyed." The ice sculpture dissolved back into vapor. Marcus realized he was crying. So was the white-haired scientist. "I've never seen anything like that. The mathematical precision, the artistic vision." "Imagine," Visha said, "what we could share with you. Not weapons, not conquest, but art and science, philosophy and mathematics. We've had 2 million years to think about the universe. We could teach you things your species won't discover for millennia. Or we could die here in your darkness, another extinct species whose knowledge vanishes into the void." Director Hawthorne stood. "The panel will deliberate. Counselor Chen, please accompany your clients to holding. We'll have a decision within an hour." The hour stretched into 3. Marcus and Lila waited in the infrared department ready room. Elena and the 3 refugees waited in a secure room. The silence broken only by Mira's occasional wind chime sounds and Lila's whispered reassurances. Finally, Agent Morrison entered. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus thought he caught something in her eyes. Hope? Relief? The panel has reached a decision. Director Hawthorne will deliver it personally. Hawthorne entered, followed by the white-haired scientist and the UN representative. The director's face was grave, but not hostile. Visha, Krell, and Mira, he began formally. On behalf of the United States government and in coordination with the United Nations Refugee Agency, I am authorized to offer you provisional refugee status under the newly established Sapient Non-Human Entity Protection Protocol. Marcus felt Elena's hand grip his. Lila made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. This status grants you the right to remain on Earth under specific conditions, Hawthorne continued. You will be required to settle in designated areas where your environmental needs can be met without disrupting human populations. You will submit to periodic monitoring, non-invasive, I assure you, to ensure biological compatibility and security. You will have access to legal representation, education, and the opportunity to contribute to society as you see fit. In exchange, the UN representative added, we ask for knowledge sharing, cultural exchange. Help us understand the universe you've experienced. Teach us what you know, not for weapons, but for wisdom. Visha was silent for a long moment. Then, you're offering us citizenship? Of a sort, Hawthorne admitted. This is unprecedented territory. We're writing the rulebook as we go. But yes, essentially, we're offering you the right to exist here, legally, safely, permanently. Why? Krell asked. We've been to 7 continents, 15 countries, hundreds of settlements. Every time we've been met with violence or rejection. Why are you different? The white-haired scientist, Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation, Marcus learned later, spoke up. Because Agent Morrison filed a report that made us think. Because Dr. Elena Chen advocated so convincingly for your humanity, even though you're not human. Because a 12-year-old girl named Lila reminded us that compassion isn't limited to our own species. And because Visha, that ice structure you created, made me realize that the universe would be immeasurably poorer without your people in it. Mira made a sound like distant bells. Lila stood and moved toward the alien child, stopping just at the edge of that cold aura. Are you staying? Lila asked. We're staying, Mira confirmed, if you'll have us. Always, Lila said fiercely. Always.
6 months later, Marcus stood at the entrance to the Darklands Preserve, watching the sun set over the mountains. The preserve had been his design. 15,000 acres of canyon land in the southwest, where deep caves and thermal vents created natural pockets of cold darkness. Solar panels on the surface powered refrigeration systems in the deeper caverns. Infrared communication networks allowed the refugees to stay connected with the surface world without harmful light exposure. 43 refugees now lived here, gathered from Mars and Europa and the scattered hiding places across Earth. More were coming. Word had spread through the galactic diaspora. There was a place on Earth where the children of darkness were welcome. Marcus had spent 6 months of his life on this project. He had poured everything he knew about architecture, about creating spaces for living, into these caves and tunnels. It was his masterwork, he knew, the thing he'd been building toward his entire career. But it wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Because Visha and the other shadow weavers had joined the design team, and what they created together went beyond anything Marcus could have imagined alone. The structures they built existed in the dark, yes, but they were anything but empty. They shaped cold air into living spaces, used ice crystals to create architecture that seemed to grow, rather than be constructed. They bent thermal currents into art and function simultaneously. Humans called it the new architecture. The refugees called it memory made manifest. Each building a tribute to what they'd lost, a hope for what they might build. Elena had established the first therapy practice for non-human clients. She was training others now, teaching psychologists how to recognize and treat trauma across species barriers. The UN had invited her to testify before the Security Council about establishing mental health protocols for extraterrestrial refugees. Lila visited the preserve every weekend. She and Mira were learning from each other. Human warmth and alien cold. Visible light and infrared perception. They were writing a book together, though how you co-authored with someone who communicated in temperature gradients was a challenge. They were figuring it out. Thomas Reeves, their old neighbor, had apologized, eventually. After the UN had made first contact official, after the refugee's story had gone public, after the world had seen the footage of the Temple of Perpetual Twilight, he'd knocked on their door one evening, shamefaced, and asked if there was any way to make amends. Marcus had directed him to the preserve's volunteer program. Now, Thomas spent his weekends helping to maintain the surface infrastructure, making sure the refugees below had what they needed. Redemption, Marcus had learned, took many forms. Agent Morrison had been promoted, director of the newly created Department of Interspecies Affairs. She'd offered Marcus a consulting position, designing habitats for other refugee species, because the children of darkness weren't alone anymore. 3 months ago, a ship had arrived from the Andromeda Galaxy, silicon-based life forms fleeing a gamma-ray burst. They breathed methane and communicated through electrical pulses. Morrison had called Marcus at 2 a.m., asking if he could design a habitat for beings made of living crystal. He'd said yes, of course he had. Now, standing at the preserve's entrance, Marcus felt Elena's hand slip into his. She'd driven up for the dedication ceremony. Today, they were officially opening the Memorial Hall, a cavern that Vaishya and the other survivors had transformed into a monument to their lost world. "Ready?" Elena asked. "Are you ever ready to witness someone's grief made into art?" "No," she admitted, "but we witness it anyway. That's how we honor them." They descended into darkness together, following the carefully marked paths that glowed in deep infrared. Humans couldn't see the glow unaided, but everyone who worked in the preserve wore infrared goggles. It was a small accommodation, learning to see in a different spectrum. The memorial hall opened before them like a cathedral carved from absence. Ice structures rose toward the cavern's ceiling, each one representing a city, a person, a moment from the lost world. They flowed together in patterns that spoke of connection, of civilization, of everything that had been and would never be again. Refugees gathered in the darkness, not just the children of darkness, but others too, the crystalline folk from Andromeda, a family of methane breathers from a moon of Jupiter, an ambassador from Mars's polar settlements. Earth was becoming a refuge, a place where the dispossessed could find shelter. Vaishya stood at the center of the hall, her form barely visible even through infrared. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the cavern, carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones ache with beauty.
We dedicate this space to memory, to the 12 billion souls who did not escape, to the artists and scientists, the parents and children, the ordinary and extraordinary people of a world that burned. We remember you. We carry you forward. And we promise, we swear, that from the darkness of our loss, we will build light. Not the light that hurts us, but the light of hope, of knowledge, of new civilizations born from the ashes of old ones. The ice structures began to shift, to flow, to dance. Other refugees joined in, the crystalline folk adding harmonic resonances,
a human string quartet playing compositions written in collaboration with alien musicians. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced, a memorial service that transcended species. Leela stood beside Mira, tears on her face but smiling. She'd helped design part of this space, her human understanding of emotion translating into structural forms that Vaishya had then rendered in ice and darkness. When it ended, when the last notes faded and the ice settled back into its memorial configurations, Marcus found himself surrounded by people, human and otherwise, all asking the same question: what comes next? He didn't have an answer, but he had blueprints, plans for new preserves, new habitats, new ways of building space where different forms of life could coexist. It would take decades, centuries maybe, but humanity had made a choice, there in that basement 6 months ago, in that federal bunker, in Director Hawthorne's decision to extend mercy rather than fear. They had chosen to be a species that said yes to refugees, even when those refugees looked nothing like them. Later that night, Marcus found Vaishya alone in the outer cavern, close to the entrance where the last light from the setting sun couldn't quite reach. "Thank you," Vaishya said without preamble, "for seeing us as people, for giving us a home." "You gave us more," Marcus replied. "You gave us the chance to be better than we were, to prove that humanity means more than just humans. Do you think your species will remember this? In 100 years? In 1,000? When we're just another part of your history?" Marcus considered the question. "I think you'll be more than history. I think you'll be family. Strange family. Family that requires refrigeration and infrared lighting, but family nonetheless." Vaishya made that wind chime sound. Laughter, Marcus had learned. "Your daughter said something similar. She said that family isn't about where you're from. It's about who stays when things get dark." "She's wise, my daughter. She learned it from you, both of you, you and Elena Chen, who looked at refugees from a dead world and saw people worth saving." "We almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "I was terrified that first night. I wanted to call the police, the military, someone who could take the decision out of my hands. But you didn't. Elena wouldn't let me. And then I looked at you, really looked, and I saw what she saw: fear, loss, the need for shelter that transcends biology." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last of the light fade from the world. In the darkness, Marcus could hear the preserve coming alive, refugees moving through their new home, adapting, surviving, beginning to thrive. "We're creating something here," Vaishya said, "something that hasn't existed before, a place where those who have lost everything can find something new. Not replacement for what's gone, nothing can replace that, but possibility, future, hope in darkness. That's what architecture is supposed to be," Marcus said. "Space that enables life, all life." "Then you're more than an architect, Marcus Chen. You're a bridge, between worlds, between species, between what was and what might be." "I'll settle for being a good neighbor. The best neighbors are bridges. They connect us to each other." Epilogue. Transmission. 50 years later, the message reached the outer edges of the solar system. It was picked up first by the listening stations on Neptune, then confirmed by the array on Pluto. A signal, clear and undeniable, from the direction of what used to be Gliese 581. The children of darkness gathered in the memorial hall to hear it. Vaisha was ancient now by human standards, nearly 400 years old, moving slowly but still weaving shadow into art. Mira had grown into a scholar, teaching interspecies communication at the university in Meridian. Krell had become Earth's leading expert on stellar mechanics, their knowledge helping humanity prepare for their own sun's eventual death billions of years hence. Marcus was gone. Cancer had taken him 15 years ago, at the age of 82. But his children, Leela and her 2 brothers, born after the refugees had arrived, filled the hall. His grandchildren played with young refugees, children born on Earth who had never known the dying light of Gliese 581. Elena was there, old but sharp, still practicing, still teaching, still helping trauma survivors of all species learn to live with their scars.
The message played through the hall's speakers, translated by computers, but carrying emotional resonances that needed no translation. To the children of darkness, wherever you may have scattered, this is Preservation Fleet 7. We survived. Against all probability, against all odds, 317 ships made it out of the disaster zone. We've found shelter on worlds at the galactic edge, places where old red suns still burn gently. We've built new cities. We've created new art. We've had children who have never seen our home world except in memory crystals. But we remember you. We remember the ships that went toward Sol System, toward that bright young star that should have burned you to ash. We thought you were lost, martyrs to impossible hope. Instead, you found sanctuary. We've intercepted Earth's broadcasts. We've seen the Darklands preserves. We've heard the music you've created with humans. We've seen the architecture. Oh, the architecture, Vaisha. You've surpassed the masters. You've created new forms that honor the old while embracing what's possible in darkness. We're coming home. Not to Gliese 581, that's gone, scattered atoms now, but to Earth, to the world that said yes when everywhere else said no, to the planet where humans looked at refugees and saw family. We're bringing 17,000 souls. We hope that's okay. We hope there's room. We bring knowledge, art, stories, and the gratitude of an entire civilization that thought it had died. Tell the humans, we remember. We remember the Chen family. We remember Agent Morrison. We remember Director Hawthorne. We remember a species that chose to be better than their fears. We're coming home. See you in 32 years. End transmission. The hall erupted. Joy, grief, relief, celebration, all mixing together in a symphony of human and alien emotion. Vaisha stood at the center, their form pulsing with cold that made frost patterns in the air. Elena found Leela in the crowd, both women crying and laughing simultaneously. "Your father would have loved this," Elena said. "He knew. Somehow, I think he knew. He always said the first refugees were just the beginning, that if we got it right, if we showed the universe that Earth was a place of sanctuary, then they'd keep coming," Elena finished. "The lost and displaced, the frightened and grieving, and we'd make room. We'd always make room. 17,000 more. We'll need new preserves, bigger infrastructure, more integration with surface communities." "You'll figure it out," Elena said confidently. "You're your father's daughter. You build spaces for living." Around them, the celebration continued. Human children and refugee children playing together, the boundaries between species becoming increasingly irrelevant. Mira was already talking to the university about expansion programs, about how to accommodate thousands of new students. The crystalline folk were composing a welcome song,
their harmonic resonances mixing with Children of Darkness thermal patterns and human instruments. It sounded like chaos. It sounded like beauty. It sounded like home. Visha approached Elena, their ancient voice carrying quiet wonder. Your Marcus built this. Not just the structures, but the idea, the possibility that different forms of life could share space, could build together, could become something new. He'd be proud, but he'd also say there's still work to do. 17,000 refugees need homes, need hope, need someone to say, yes, there's room. There's always room. That's what we learned from your family. That's what we'll teach the new arrivals. Earth isn't special because of its resources or its location. It's special because people here, humans and others, decided to be generous in darkness. Elena looked around Memorial Hall, at the ice structures that commemorated a dead world, at the living beings who had survived to create new ones. She thought about Marcus, about the choice they'd made that night 50 years ago to shelter 3 frightened refugees in their basement. One choice, one moment of compassion, and it had changed everything. Welcome home, she whispered to the darkness, to the refugees yet to arrive, to the future still being built. And in the darkness, the universe answered with light of its own, the cold light of ice crystals, the warm light of human hope, the infinite spectrum of possibilities when different worlds chose to become one. In memory of all refugees, human and otherwise, who ever sought shelter in darkness and found light in unexpected places.